At one point, scientists believed, Christian scientists at least, who believed the Bible, believed that God had created every single species of animal just as it was, and that those different species would not fundamentally change. Darwin actually disproved the idea of the immutability of species, and you did read about that in your book. This actually lends very well to the idea of a kind, which you just saw in the video that you just watched. And the important thing about kinds is that all of these different kinds can breed with one another. For example, the dog kind includes wolves and dingoes and coyotes and poodles and dachshunds and German shepherds, Alaskan huskies. It includes all of the dog kind, and they can all breed with each other because they're all of the same kind. You can have a cat kind, lions and tigers and domestic cats. People have actually bred a lion and a tiger together, and they made ligers and tigans because the animals are able to breed with each other. They are of the same kind. Bobcats and lynx are able to breed with each other because they are of the same kind. There is a horse kind, so horses and donkeys and zebras would all fit within that horse kind, and people have bred together donkeys and zebras to make zonkies. They've bred together horses and zebras to make zorses and hebras. And so you can actually see some of these animals if you go to the Creation Museum and you see some of their displays there. The animals are live and they're actually there and you can see them. False killer whales can breed with bottlenose dolphins. And so this is really good evidence that when the Bible talks about all the different kinds that God created, that he created a kind and programmed into its DNA all of the different variation that you see, and then that eventually got to the point where we see all the different species that we have today. One common argument against the Bible is that there's no way that Noah could have gotten all of those animals to fit on the ark. No matter how big the ark was, he couldn't have gotten everything to fit. But if he only had one pair of each kind, that greatly decreases the number of animals that he would have needed to take with him. And so since all of that diversity was programmed into the DNA of all those animals, they were then, after the flood, going to be able to diversify and make all of the different kinds of animals that we see today. So you can't extrapolate the making of different species within a kind to suddenly going into different kinds completely. Like dogs don't morph into cats. We've never seen that happen in all the years of human history. We've never seen that happen. And again, that's an example of the extrapolation that we talked about when I talked about running a mile and how fast you can run that mile. You can only get it down so far. Extrapolation can only go so far. And so one kind is not going to have the genetic information within it to be able to morph into another kind. I really want you, as we're going through this, to really have your thinking cap on. And I'm going to tell you a story about something that happened to me to give you an example that you have a brain, and I want to make sure that you're using it as we're going through this information. I was in college, and when I first went to college, I was not yet a Christian, and I was in this biology class where my professor was a staunch evolutionist. We were discussing cells, and we were discussing the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And hopefully you will remember from when we studied cells that prokaryotic cells do not have organelles, where eukaryotic cells do. The professor told us that there was a time when one of those prokaryotic cells ate something that it shouldn't eat, and then the creature that it ate became an organelle within that cell, and that's how eukaryotic cells started evolving. And I can remember sitting in class that day going, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And so I raised my hand and I asked the professor, I said, first of all, why would that cell eat something it shouldn't eat? I mean, didn't it know better? And secondly, even if it did eat it, it seems like either the creature that got eaten would have been digested, Or if it was that bad and it shouldn't have eaten it, why didn't the original cell die from eating the other creature? I mean, wouldn't you think that's what would happen? And the professor gave me a very condescending look. And he replied, well, obviously it had to be that way. And I remember thinking, that just doesn't make any sense to me at all. It doesn't make any sense to me that would happen, where one living creature could be eaten by another living creature and suddenly that living creature becomes an organelle. How does that even happen? And of course, that was even before I understood much about DNA. I was like, well, how did the DNA get into the original cell to start producing all those organelles? How does that happen? Later, I was able to read in Genesis how God created everything according to its kind, and we see that everything reproduces according to its kind. So I tell you that story because I want you to realize that even if a person is a teacher or some other authority figure, and they tell you something and it doesn't make any sense to you, make sure to use the brain that God gave you. I wasn't a Christian in that biology class, but I still had been given a brain by God that worked very well, and I knew that no matter how smart that professor was, what he had just told me did not make a lick of sense. And so I want to encourage you to very carefully investigate when somebody tells you something that doesn't agree with common sense, that doesn't agree now with the Word of God as well, because I have always found those kinds of statements to be wrong when I've investigated them further. So I want to make sure you are doing the same thing. And when you hear something that doesn't make sense to you, I want you to make sure that you investigate it down to the point where you can find an answer and you can be comfortable with what you're believing.